All right, you
Yo,
guys.
yo.
Yo. Okay, so we're gonna be doing again Masechet. We're gonna continue with God's help with Masechet Teruma. We got ChatGPT over here. Yo, ChatGPT, say what's up.
Hey, what's up? I'm
Uh,
here and
all
ready
right,
to
all
help.
right,
We'll
all right,
keep
all right,
going
all
with
right, all
Masechet
right, all
Teruma.
right. Yo, so okay. על החמישה לא יתרמו, רבי יוסי שמואל בר נחמן שמע לכל הון. מן הכה דבר el bnei Yisrael ויקחו לי תרומה. Okay, so what does it mean, shama lechol hon? What does that mean?
Absolutely. Let's break it down. When it says Shema Lachochon, it's basically saying he heard it for all of you, or he derived it for all of you from here. In other words, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman is saying, hey, I heard or learned this teaching for all of you from this particular verse. So it's just a way of him saying that this explanation applies to everyone listening, and he's getting it from that verse about speaking to the children of Israel.
Okay, so he heard this for you guys, mean hacha. Daber al bnei Israel. Okay, chamisha lo yetromu. So, okay. Uh, so Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman says he heard this for all you guys, meaning all of us, right? Min hacha, for this. Daber al bnei Israel vayikhu li truma. Okay. פרט לגוי, מעט כל איש פרט לקטן, אשר ידברנו ליבו פרט לחרש ולשוטה. Okay, so what does it mean פרט לגוי?
Absolutely. Let's break it down. When it says parat lagoy, that means it's excluding a non-Jew. In other words, the verse is specifically highlighting that the command to take teruma is for the children of Israel, and that naturally excludes a non-Jew. So
Okay.
all those phrases are just
מעט כל איש פרט לקטן. So what is that?
yeah. So that next bit me'et called ish parat lakataman means from every man, which excludes a minor. So basically, it's making it clear that the command applies to adults, people who are considered ish or man, and it excludes children. So all of these little phrases are just kind of narrowing down who's in and who's out of the mitzvah.
Okay, מעט כל איש פרט לקטן, אשר ידברנו ליבו תיקחו, ידברנו ליבו פרט לחרש, ולשתה, וזאת התרומה אשר תיקחו מאיתם פרט לתורם את שאינו שלו. אוקיי, פיין. ולשתף וזאת התרומה וזאת התרומה אשר תיקחו מאת פרט לתורם את שאינו שלו. Alright, so מאת כל איש פרט לקטן אשר ידברנו ליבו פרט לחרש ולשוטה, וזאת התרומה אשר תיקחו מאיתם פרט לתורם את, okay, מאיתם, meaning from you and not from somebody else.
Exactly. You're summing it up perfectly. So when it says meitam, meaning from them or from you specifically, it's excluding taking teruma from something that doesn't belong to you. In other words, you can't separate teruma from someone else's produce on their behalf without it being authorized. So all these little phrases are just narrowing down who's supposed to do it and under what conditions, and you're totally on track with that understanding.
Interesting. Okay, ויוכיח מעשה שלהם, what does it mean ויוכיח מעשה שלהן על מחשבתן, דתנן תמן האלו. What does it mean ויוכיח מעשה שלהן?
Absolutely. So when it says vayochiach ma'asehem al machashavtan, it means no actions prove their intentions. In other words, the way they act demonstrates what they were thinking. So it's a phrase that's basically saying that you can tell what their real intent was by looking at what they actually did. And that kind of reasoning is then connected to the halakhic discussion. So yeah, that's the gist of that phrase.
דתנינן תמן העלו חרש שוטה וקטן אף על פי Shechishev Sheyered Alehen Hatal Einan. Okay, so what does this part mean? Einan Bechi Yutan Mipnei Sheyesh Lahem Maase Ve'en Lahem Machashava.
Absolutely. So this part is basically a teaching that even if we're talking about a deaf person, someone who's not a sound mind or a minor, basically people who don't have full mental capacity, even if you think that they might have had the right intention, they aren't really obligated. And the reasoning is because they have actions, but they don't have the full level of intention or understanding that makes those actions fully
What does it mean? What does it mean? Vayochiach maaseh shelahem. Vayochiach, doesn't vayochiach mean rebuke?
Great catch. So vayochiach can indeed mean rebuke in some contexts, like to correct or to prove someone wrong. But in a more general sense, it can also mean to demonstrate or to prove. So in this context, it's more like their actions demonstrate or prove what their real intentions are.
Okay,
but you're right that
what are
in
their
other
what are their intentions what are their actions that prove what their intentions are? More tell you about what 5 people like are not allowed to be doing Truma.
Absolutely. So the idea here is basically that for those 5 categories of people, like the deaf person, someone who isn't of sound mind, a minor, a non-Jew, and so on, even if they go through the motions of separating Teruma, their actions reveal that they don't have the full legal intention or capacity that halakha requires. In other words, where actions show that they didn't have the proper intent that an adult Israelite would have.
Okay,
so
real quick, what is the like best first commentary like to learn for like Tractate Yerushalmi? Like, what's the first kind of like the best commentary to learn Tractate Yerushalmi with? By the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help. So if you're diving into the Talmud Yerushalmi, a really classic go-to commentary is the Pnei Moshe. It's one of the most well-known and user-friendly commentaries on the Yerushalmi. Another one that often go hand in hand with it is the Korban Haidah. Both of those are really great for getting your footing and understanding the flow of the Yerushalmi.
So who's the Pnei Moshe?
Absolutely. So the Pnei Moshe is actually a commentary written by Rabbi Moshe Margolis. He lived in the 18th century, and he wrote this commentary specifically to help explain the Talmud Yerushalmi because it's a little less commonly studied than the Bavli, and sometimes it's a bit more challenging. So his work, Pnei Moshe, is one of the go-to commentaries to really get a clearer understanding of a text.
So what are some stories you could tell about the Pnei Moshe?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Pnei Moshe, Rabbi Moshe Margolis, is actually a pretty interesting figure. He lived in the 1700s, and he served as a rabbi in several communities, including in Ukraine. One of the things that's kind of cool about him is that he was really dedicated to making the Yerushalmi accessible, and because of that, he became known as someone who really helped open up this part of the Talmud to a lot of people. There's a story that he was known for his humility and his dedication to teaching, and even though he was a great scholar, he always tried to make things clear for others. So he's kind of remembered as a very approachable and warm teacher through his commentary.
All right. Sounds good. All right, so let's learn a little bit about the Pnei Moshe's commentary, meaning let's learn a little bit about the commentary with God's help. So, all right, let's go back to the Mishnah a little bit. Okay. Chamisha lo yutromu Menina lemeute ha de Rabbi Yehuda lekaman. Okay, what does it mean, menina lemeute?
Absolutely. Let's dive back in. So when you see the phrase menina lemute, it basically means what is this coming to exclude? In other words, it's asking who are we leaving out by mentioning these 5 people?
What does it mean, menina, though?
Yeah, absolutely. So menina here is kind of like saying the number or the count. So when the text asks menina lemute, it's basically saying the number mentioned, what does it come to exclude? Or the number of these 5, what are we leaving out by counting these particular categories? So it's just a way of the commentary kind of asking.
Menina, this what we're counting. Lemeute. Menina lemeute, like meaning it's supposed to say menina lemeute ma. No?
Exactly, you got it. It's kind of like a shorthand. When they say Shanina Lamute, they're really just abbreviating Menina Lamute Ma, which means this number, what is it coming to exclude? So you're totally right.
All right.
They're just kind of
the Rabbi Yehuda lekaman this what does it mean? Daled Samech Lamed though.
Yeah, definitely. So when you see Dalit or sometimes Dav Shell in a commentary, it's just a shorthand notation. It stands for Dilakaman Simon Lamed, which means later on, section 30 or whatever the specific section is. So it's basically
lekaman this Daled Samech quotation marks Lamed, then Katan Shelo Havi Shtei Searot. Okay, so what is that? What is this abbreviation Daled Samech Lamed though? Daled Samech quotation marks Lamed.
Yeah, absolutely. So that abbreviation Dalit Samach Lamed is just a shorthand way of saying, look further down in section 30. The Dalit is like Dalit, which can stand for a number, like 4 or a section reference, and the Samach Lamed kind of indicate a saman or a section, and then the number 30. So basically, it's just the commentator's shorthand way of saying, hey, we're going to talk about this more in section 30 later on.
All right. So perhaps it doesn't seem like we know the answer to this, so maybe if you guys write the answer to the commentary what Dalet Samech Lamed means, okay, and just put it in the commentary. Okay, Lakaman the Samech Lamed in this reference point, Katan Shalo Hevi Shtei Sa'arot Terumato Teruma. Even if he didn't think Ve'olachatchila Lo Yetrom de Lididei Sheshah Have. Okay, so what is this last part talking about? What's this? How would you summarize this whole Pnei Moshe over here, though?
Absolutely. So let's sum it up. What the Pnei Moshe is doing here is he's basically explaining that when the Mishnah talks about these 5 people who shouldn't separate Teruma, it's actually excluding certain other cases. And he points out that later on, like in section 30, there's a discussion that even a minor who hasn't reached puberty, if they do separate Teruma, is still considered valid after the fact, even though ideally they shouldn't do it. So he's really just clarifying how this Mishnah lines up with a later piece of the Talmud and kind of showing that there's a bit of a nuance.
So
even though
what is he excluding, though?
Yeah, so the Pnei Moshe is really using that Manina Namute to show that by listing these 5 types of people who shouldn't separate Teruma, the Mishnah is actually excluding other cases. Specifically, he's pointing out that there's a minor who hasn't reached an age of puberty, but if that minor did separate Teruma, it's still valid after the fact. So the exclusion is basically that these 5 categories don't cover every single scenario, and in some other cases, like a minor, it might still be valid even though it's not ideal. So that's what he's kind of bringing out.
Interesting. Lemute. But what is lemute? Like, what's being excluded, though? Isn't child one of the people who is excluded? No?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So it does sound a little tricky, but here's the nuance. The Mishnah lists the child as one of the 5 who ideally shouldn't separate Teruma. But what the Pnei Moshe is pointing out is that this list is excluding the scenario where if that child actually did it, it still counts. So the Lamute is excluding the idea that it's completely invalid. It's basically saying, yeah, we listed these 5, but we're not saying it's totally invalid if a minor did it. It is on the list. But the exclusion is that it's not a total no-go if it happens.
It's an exclusion? How is it an exclusion, though?
Yeah, I get you. It's a bit subtle. So when we say exclusion here, it's not excluding the child from the list. The child is definitely on the list of those who shouldn't ideally do it. What it's excluding is the idea that if a child did it, it would be completely invalid. In other words, the mission is listing these 5 people to say they shouldn't do it, but it's excluding the notion that if a child does it, it never counts. Instead, it's saying if a child does it, it's not ideal, but the Teruma is still valid. So the exclusion is that we're excluding the idea of total invalidity. It's a fine point, but that's what he's getting at.
We're excluding the point of complete invalidity. Okay, meaning with the but it's only with the child only.
Exactly, you got it now.
But how
it's
is
really
it?
just
How
about,
is it? But listen, the commentary is on the fact that it says chamisha lo yitromo. It's not. The commentary isn't on the fact that it says that Rabbi Yehuda says lakaman desamech lamed or whatever. Katan shalo hevi shtei saarot trumato truma. Like, you know. But it says ulechatchila lo yitrom. Deledide shisha heve. So, like, it's coming to exclude him in the beginning, though, but not at the end. No?
yeah.
What?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So the commentary is,
So, a commentary is what?
yeah, I get what you mean. Basically, the commentary is focusing on that list of 5 who shouldn't separate.
What did you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So the commentary is really zeroing in on that list of 5 people who ideally shouldn't separate Teruma. And what it's doing is saying that by listing these 5, the mission is kind of excluding the idea that if a child did it, it'd be totally invalid. So it's like at the
outset, what?
Sure, let me sum it up. Basically, the commentary is focusing on that list of 5 people who shouldn't separate Teruma, and it's saying that by mentioning those 5, we're kind of leaving out the idea that if a child does it, it's completely invalid. In other words, the exclusion here is that it's not totally invalid.
All right.
Yeah,
All right,
let me complete that thought.
Okay.
So
So far, it seems pretty good. The conversation so far seems pretty accurate. We're gonna continue with the next Pnei Moshe with God's help in the next couple videos. So far, seems like it makes sense. Manina Milte, we're counting to specifically exclude. Why are we coming to exclude? For behold, the Rabbi Yehuda lekaman, it says in a future reference, Katan shelo hevi shtei se'arot trumato truma. Okay, because but in the beginning, lo yitrom, he should not come to exclude. So it's coming to exclude lechatchila specifically to teach us that lechatchila. This is what it seems like it's teaching so far. By the way, lechatchila you should not separate. Deledide shisha heve. So this thing, let's ask ChatGPT real quick. What does that part mean? Yo, what does it mean? Deledide lo yitrom deledide shisha havu.
absolutely. So that phrase "diladide shishahagu" is basically saying that for him, meaning for the minor, it's only a delay or a waiting period. In other words, ideally he shouldn't do it right now.
Shisha havu. It's a waiting. How would you say shisha?
Yeah, so shisha really just means a delay or a wait-in. In this context, it's basically saying it's just a matter of waiting for him to reach the right age. So when they say shishahavu, they mean for him it's just a temporary waiting period until he gets older, and then he could do it properly. So shisha just means a delay.
What is the wait for him though? Like what specifically is it talking about that is the wait for him though? You know.
Absolutely. So the wait in this case is just waiting for him to reach the age of maturity. In other words, it's talking
But like,
about
okay,
the
that's the wait. But what does that have to do with what it said earlier? Chamisha lo yitromu min manina lemeutei ha del Rabbi Yehuda kaman des samech lamed katan shelo yavi shtei sarot trumato truma ulachatchila lo yitrom delididei shisha havu.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's connect the dots. So basically, the commentary is saying we have these 5 people who ideally shouldn't separate Teruma. Now, when it mentions the child, what it's really saying is that this is just a temporary situation for the child. Once the child matures, then he can actually do it properly. So the whole point is that the child is on the list right now, but it's only a matter of waiting for him to grow up. And then once he's
What
mature,
is it? How come it says dalid like de ledide? What's excuse me? What's the point of saying dalid de ledide though?
yeah, absolutely. So that little D or Dility Day is basically just Aramaic shorthand meaning for him, or in his case. So it's just a way the commentary is saying.
For him,
It's just a matter
for him lechatchila, or for him b'diavad though. Like what is it for specifically for him waiting? Like the situation for him lechatchila, that he is like asur to be doing any truma, or after the fact that he by accidentally did truma and it's okay for him. Is that the waiting period for him? Like, you know, what is the talking about?
Yeah, great question. So it's really talking about the lechatchila situation. In other words, from the outset, he shouldn't be doing it because he's not yet mature. That's the waiting period, waiting until he's mature enough. But if he did a gidievet after the fact, still counts. So the waiting is really about the ideal initial situation.
Okay, so sounds good, you guys. So everything seems like it makes sense pretty good so far. Other than that, God's help will be with you guys next video. Alright, you guys. Peace.